The air left my lungs, so fast my ribs hurt. My father stood at the head of the 12th floor conference table with one hand flat against polished mahogany, and the other holding a packet of glossy printouts that should never have been in his possession. Fluorescent light bounced off the glass walls and turned every face in the room a little pale, a little hard. Owen Mercer, my older brother, leaned back in his leather chair with his ankle resting on his knee, pretending to look relaxed while his thumb tapped a frantic rhythm against his cuff. Celeste Mercer, my father's second wife, set her wineglass down on a slate coaster so carefully you could hear the stem click. Lila Henshaw, our foundation's chief financial officer, kept her manicured fingers laced over a yellow legal pad and wouldn't look directly at me. Then my father smiled. It was a neat, private smile. The kind that always meant he had decided the ending before anyone else knew there was a story. "You stole from this family," Graham Mercer said, and tossed the printouts across the table. "For this stupid little project." The pages fanned out in front of me. Wire confirmations, vendor invoices, screenshots of the Northlight dashboard. My dashboard. The thing I had spent 3 years building after work, at night, on weekends, in library basements and coffee shops, and one freezing December in my apartment kitchen with a space heater pointed at my knees. Across the top of one page, in Owen's heavy black marker, someone had written misappropriated assets. Behind me, the conference room door opened and 2 members of the Family Foundation board stepped in, drawn by the raised voices. One of them, Harold Pierce, adjusted his silver tie and stopped cold when he saw the papers. The other, Denise Walsh, tightened both hands around her tablet like she was holding onto a railing in rough water. Their hesitation lasted half a second. Then they took seats. My father had wanted witnesses. Voices gathered around the table like vultures. "My name is Julia Mercer. I'm 32. And this is the story of how I turned the word my father used to crush me, stupid, into the loudest correction he ever heard in his life." "You want to deny it now?" Owen asked, sliding one page toward me with 2 fingers. He still had the tan he got from a golf resort in Scottsdale the month before, still had that glossy ease of a man who had never confused being handed something with earning it. "Because I'd really love to hear you try." Lila finally spoke, but only after wetting her lips. "The transfers are irregular, Julia. They originated from accounts connected to Mercer family initiatives." "Connected," I repeated. My father gave a dry laugh. "Do not start with semantics. Not today." Celeste crossed one leg over the other and folded her hands over her knee, the diamond bracelet at her wrist flashing under the fluorescent lights. "This could have been handled privately," she said in that polished charity luncheon voice of hers. "If you had come forward, if you had just told the truth." The truth. That word had always sounded expensive in my father's world, like something bought, polished, and displayed, not something lived. Harold Pierce cleared his throat. "Graham, perhaps we should wait for counsel." "No," my father said. "We do this now." He pushed away from the table and walked toward me slowly, stopping close enough for me to smell cedar on his jacket and the sharp mint from whatever he'd taken after lunch. He lowered one hand to the back of my chair and leaned in just slightly, never enough to seem overtly threatening, always enough to make the threat personal. "You embarrassed this family with your little side hobby," he said quietly. "Then you used our donor network, our staff, our resources, and our name to build it into something you thought you could hide. You don't get to play founder now. You don't get to stand in front of cameras next week and pretend you did this by yourself." So that was it. Not just the accusation. Not just the trap. The cameras point 3 days earlier, a producer from CBS Mornings had called to confirm a segment they were running on education innovators solving college attrition for first-generation students. Northlight had been selected after our pilot with the Chicago Public Library System posted retention numbers nobody expected. They wanted an interview in New York the following week. I had told exactly 4 people. My lawyer, my best friend Priya, my lead engineer, and, against my better judgment, my father. He had laughed for a full 6 seconds over dinner, cut into his steak, and called the whole thing a stupid app for kids who can't fill out forms. Now I knew why he'd wanted the date. Denise Walsh looked at me with something between pity and alarm. "Julia, if there's an explanation, this is the moment." Owen gave a short, ugly laugh. "There isn't." I looked at the papers again. Someone had been thorough, just not careful enough. The metadata stamps were wrong. The vendor codes were wrong. One invoice had a Mercer Foundation approval sequence that hadn't existed until 6 months after the supposed transfer date, which meant they'd rushed, which meant they were nervous. My father mistook my silence for fear. He straightened and slid both hands into his trouser pockets. "I'm giving you one chance," he said. "You sign the assignment documents, you acknowledge Northlight was developed under Mercer Family Initiatives, and we contain this. Refuse, and I make this criminal." Criminal. The word landed hard enough that Denise inhaled sharply. Harold stared at the ceiling for a second, the universal gesture of a donor who had just realized the room was more expensive than the truth. Celeste pressed her tongue to one canine, a tiny habit she had whenever she was pleased. Owen's heel struck the stone floor like a metronome. "This is insane," I said. "Then prove it." Owen snapped. My father lifted a folder from the end of the table and dropped it in front of me. A signature page was clipped neatly on top. IP assignment, non-disparagement, emergency board ratification. They had prepared it all before I'd even entered the building. I flipped through the first 2 pages without reacting. My pulse had slowed, not sped up. That was always the thing my father never understood about me. He mistook quiet for weakness because noise was the only way he recognized force. Celeste leaned forward. "Julia, sweetheart, enough. Sign it. Save yourself the humiliation." I looked at her, then at my father, then at Owen, and I smiled, not warmly, not dramatically, just enough. "Before I do anything," I said calmly, "I'd like you to call security." The room went still. My father frowned. "What?" "I want everyone kept exactly where they are," I said. "No one leaves. No one calls anyone. No one gets to fix what's in those files after this conversation starts." Owen barked a laugh, but it cracked halfway through. "You think you're in control here?" I set my phone on the table, face down, and folded my hands over it. "I think," I said evenly, "that if you're going to accuse me of theft, we should be very careful about who's actually stealing." The silence that followed was absolute. My father's expression changed first. Not much, just a fraction. The corners of his mouth flattened. The private smile vanished. He had expected tears, denial, maybe anger, something messy, something he could use. What he got instead was me reaching for the glass bottle of San Pellegrino at the center of the table, unscrewing the cap, and pouring myself water as if we were discussing seating arrangements. He stared at me. "Julia, you said prove it." I replied, taking a slow sip. "So let's do that." I turned my phone over and tapped the screen. The display lit up with a grid of folders. Dates, wire confirmations, server logs, voice memos. I angled it toward the middle of the table, not toward him, toward the witnesses. "First," I said, "Northlight was never developed on Mercer hardware, Mercer servers, Mercer time, or Mercer payroll. I know that because I anticipated this exact argument 11 months ago, and I hired a third-party digital forensics firm to document every device, every repository, and every commit. Their report is time-stamped, notarized, and sitting in my attorney's inbox." Lila's shoulders jerked. I didn't look at her yet. "Second, those transfer records you just handed me are fabricated. Sloppy fabrication, actually. The approval, routing code on page 4 wasn't created until after the Foundation switched accounting platforms last October. Which means someone built a backdated sequence using current templates. That's not fraud I committed. That's fraud somebody committed to frame me." Harold Pierce slowly took off his glasses. Owen shoved back from the table. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" I asked. I tapped again. A PDF opened. Mazarine Digital Forensics. Full audit of repository history, device mapping, and external backups. 3 highlighted lines. Personal MacBook serial. Private Git server. Offsite build records. Denise leaned in to read. My father reached for the phone. I covered it with my hand. "Not yet," I said. There was a tiny tightening in his jaw. He hated being told to wait. "Third," I continued. "Lila, the vendor disbursements on pages 6 through 9 did originate from accounts connected to Mercer Family Initiatives. Because you signed them." Her face lost color so quickly it was almost clinical. She started. I slid a second file onto the screen. Signed authorization. Lila Henshaw. Digital certificate intact. Attached memo describing data architecture consulting reimbursements approved under Foundation Innovation Grants. Celeste turned toward her, so sharply her bracelet scraped the table. Lila! Lila swallowed. I was told those were legacy obligations. By whom? I asked quietly. No one answered, so I opened the audio file. My father's voice filled the room, unmistakable under the hiss of a car speaker and turn signal. If Julia asks, tell her it's donor analytics cleanup. Move it through Lila. And get Owen the drafts before the network people call back. When the clip ended, nobody breathed for a second. My father stared at the phone as if volume alone might make the recording unreal. Owen's mouth had opened, but whatever he meant to say got trapped there. Denise Walsh slowly set down her tablet. Harold Pierce sank back into his chair with the expression of a man who had just realized he should have retired 3 years ago. You recorded me, my father said. I met his eyes. No. Your car recorded you. Your assistant forwarded the file when she realized you intended to pin this on her if anything went wrong. That got his attention in a different way. Marisol, he said too fast. There it was. The first crack. I let it sit. Let the name move around the room. Marisol Vega had been his executive assistant for 14 years. She knew his passwords, his schedule, the names of the women he sent flowers to, the contractors he paid late, the donors he flattered, the reporters he avoided, and every version of his voice. If she had switched sides, he had a larger problem than me. You should sit down, I told him. I'm not sitting down. You might want to. He didn't. Owen did. The leather chair made a soft, expensive sound when my brother dropped into it. The confidence had gone out of him all at once. He looked younger without it. Not kinder. Just smaller. Celeste recovered first. She always did. Even if any of this is true, she said, her tone sharpening, you had no right to secretly collect internal records. I had every right to preserve evidence related to attempted theft of my company, I replied, especially after Owen asked one of our Foundation IT contractors to clone my donor outreach drive. Owen shot upright. That is a lie. I opened a security log. Contractor access ticket. Owen Mercer. Requested asset mirror for brand continuity review. Denise whispered, Oh my God. I finally looked at Owen. You cloned the wrong drive, I said. The one you copied was a decoy. I made sure you'd find exactly what I wanted you to find. His face tightened. You set me up. No, I said. I documented you. That sentence changed the temperature in the room. People think power shifts sound dramatic. In reality, it often sounds like paper stopping. A pen uncapping and then not moving. A throat being cleared and then staying closed. It sounds like the room deciding, collectively, that the wrong person had been standing at the head of the table. My father still tried to force the old gravity back into place. You're making this far more serious than it needs to be, he said. If there was confusion about ownership. Actually, I cut in, calm as still water. You were attempting theft. He flinched. Just once. Small. But I saw it. Then I slid one last file onto the screen. Email thread. Subject line, media positioning. My father. Owen. Celeste. Lila. Attached draft press release naming Mercer Family Initiatives as the creator of Northlight and me as program staff. The draft had been saved 48 hours after he called my work stupid. Harold Pierce stood up so abruptly his chair rolled backward. Graham, he said, voice thin. Tell me that is not your email. My father's mouth hardened. Sit down, Harold. No. Sit. Down. I capped my water bottle. Don't bother, I said. My attorney already has the full archive, along with the network producer who called me, because after that dinner, I decided I wasn't interested in being surprised this week. Every eye in the room came back to me. You sent this to the network? Celeste asked. Not all of it, I said. Just enough to clarify that any attempt to present Northlight as a Mercer initiative would be false and actionable. The pulse at my father's temple was visible now. You stupid little. He stopped himself too late. I tilted my head. Go on. He looked at the witnesses, at the board members, at the papers, at the phone, at Lila, who had gone perfectly still. Then at Owen, who now looked like he would gladly blame the entire thing on oxygen if it would get him out of the room. I gathered the forged packet and tapped it into a neat stack. You called my work stupid on Tuesday, I said. By Thursday you had drafted a press release to steal it. By this morning you had fabricated financial records and prepared assignment documents to force me to sign under threat of criminal prosecution. So here's what happens next. You do not contact the network. You do not issue any statement. You do not touch another file connected to Northlight. And you will have legal representation present when my counsel meets you at Whitmore and Vale tomorrow at 9. Celeste's voice thinned. You've already scheduled counsel? I stood and slid my chair in. Yes, I said. Yesterday. Owen stared at me. You knew. I picked up my phone. I knew enough. My father stepped forward, his voice dropping low. If you walk out of this room, Julia, you're blowing up your family over a piece of software. I looked at him for a long moment. No, I said quietly. I'm refusing to let my family blow up my life over it. Then I walked to the door. My hand was already on the brushed steel handle when I turned back once more. Oh, I said. And Marisol doesn't work for you anymore. I left them in that fluorescent room with the forged documents, the donor board, and the first real silence my father had probably heard in 30 years. They thought they had cornered me with paper and blood and old fear. They had no idea I had spent months building a room they couldn't talk their way out of. The next morning, Whitmore and Vale's conference suite on East Wacker looked exactly like the kind of place men like my father trusted. Dark walnut walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, cream wool rug, leather chairs arranged with such deliberate symmetry it almost felt ceremonial. Authority had a scent in rooms like that. Coffee, toner, expensive citrus polish. The kind of air that suggests consequences will arrive in binders. I got there 15 minutes early. Adrian Kessler was already inside, jacket off, shirt sleeves folded once at the forearms, reading through a color tab stack of exhibits with a pencil in one hand and his glasses low on his nose. Adrian had been recommended by a woman on the board of a community grant consortium after he dismantled a private equity firm that tried to bury a founder in paperwork. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't warm in the obvious way, but he had a methodical stillness that made other people hear themselves more clearly, and that was usually enough. He looked up when I entered. How much sleep? 3 hours. That's 3 more than Graham Mercer got, he said. I set my bag down. You sound confident. I sound prepared. There's a difference. I had learned to love that difference. Mira Dutta was at the far end of the table, setting up a monitor. She was our forensic accountant, compact and precise, with a blunt black bob and a way of speaking that made every number feel like a nail being driven straight. She gave me a nod. We've got banking records, routing anomalies, the fabricated sequences, donor correspondence, and the internal draft releases. If they deny chronology, I can walk them through every date. Any word from Marisol? I asked. Adrian glanced at his watch. She's downstairs with her counsel. She'll come up when needed. I moved to the window and looked down at the river. Chicago in late October always carried a kind of polish fatigue. The water was slate-colored. The sky looked scrubbed. Down below, people in dark coats moved along the sidewalks with coffee cups and umbrellas and ordinary worries. I envied them for maybe 3 seconds. Then Adrian handed me a folder. Your speaking notes, he said. Short answers. No speeches unless you absolutely need one. I flipped it open. On the first page, in his handwriting, he'd written, "Calm as leverage." I smiled despite myself. You know me pretty well for someone I met 6 weeks ago. He slid his glasses back up. No, I know your father. At 9 sharp the door opened. Graham Mercer came in first, but the man who entered wasn't quite the one who had towered over the conference table the day before. He still wore custom navy wool and a silver watch that probably cost more than most people's rent, but there was strain around his eyes now, and he held his jaw too carefully. Behind him came Owen in a charcoal suit that fit badly across the shoulders because he had lost weight fast. Celeste followed with a cream silk blouse buttoned all the way to the throat and a smile so composed it was almost abstract. Lila entered last beside a lawyer I didn't recognize, her legal pad clutched against her ribs like a shield. My father's counsel was Martin Voss, senior partner at Braddock Sloan, white-haired, courtly, and visibly annoyed to have been dragged into a mess that should have remained the sort of family coercion people settle at country clubs. He shook Adrian's hand without warmth, nodded at me, and sat down. No one reached for coffee. Adrian waited until everyone was seated, then spoke in a tone that made the room arrange itself around him. Thank you for coming. We're here to address attempted misappropriation of Ms. Julia Mercer's intellectual property, fabrication of financial documents, unlawful access to protected digital assets, potential charitable governance violations, and threatened coercion intended to force assignment under false pretenses. Martin Voss steepled his fingers. That's a theatrical framing. It's an accurate one, Adrian said. My father leaned back and tried on a smile he hadn't earned. This is a family misunderstanding. Adrian didn't even look at him. Then this will be a short meeting. He nodded to Mira. The monitor lit up. On the screen was a timeline. Not a dramatic one. No red circles. No arrows. Just clean black text on white background with dates, bank records, server logs, calendar entries, and internal communications arranged in a line so plain it became merciless. August 14th, 3 years earlier, Northlight LLC registered in Illinois under my name. September 2nd, first code repository created on private server. November 11th through April 22nd, development invoices paid from my personal account and 2 microgrants from a civic education fund unrelated to Mercer entities. 6 months ago, Northlight pilot begins with Chicago Public Library's Harold Washington branch. 3 months ago, Mercer Family Initiative's donor data requests increased without authorization. 10 weeks ago, Owen Mercer requests mirrored access to drive labeled community partnerships. 8 weeks ago, internal email from Graham Mercer asking communications team to pull language positioning Northlight under family banner before TV/press interest grows. 7 weeks ago, new accounting code sequence created in Mercer Foundation software. 5 weeks ago, 3 documents backdated using that sequence. 3 days ago, dinner at Leclerc Steakhouse, recorded by restaurant security camera and corroborated by staff deposition, where Graham Mercer refers to Northlight as a stupid app. 2 days ago, draft press release prepared naming Mercer Family Initiatives as creator. Yesterday, emergency board confrontation with fabricated records and coercive assignment packet. Dates are ugly things when you've built your life on charm. They don't care how important your last name sounds. Martin Voss turned one page, then another. This doesn't establish intent. Mira spoke without inflection. Exhibit 14 does. She enlarged the press release draft. Footer metadata. Owen's login. Revision trail. Comments from Celeste requesting stronger founder language for Graham. A note from Lila asking whether we need Julia visible at all. Celeste's face stayed smooth, but one thumb slid across the edge of her ring as if testing whether it was still attached. Martin said, internal communications about publicity strategy are not theft. Adrian nodded. No, but they become relevant when paired with falsified transfer documents, unauthorized data access, and threat of criminal referral, unless Ms. Mercer assigns ownership. He slid a folder across the table. This contains yesterday's audio clip, the forged packet, metadata analysis, and witness statements from 2 board members present during the coercive demand. My father pushed the folder back without opening it. I deny the phrase coercive. Adrian finally looked at him. You threatened your daughter with criminal exposure unless she signed over a company you had already mocked privately and attempted to reposition publicly. If you have another term for that, I'm happy to hear it. My father's stare sharpened. I was protecting family interests. And there it was. The old doctrine. Family as weapon. Family as shield. Family as the velvet cloth thrown over anything ugly enough to require covering. I folded my hands and let Adrian work. Mira moved to the banking records next. You'll notice, she said, that the supposed misappropriations did not enrich Ms. Mercer. They routed instead through a temporary vendor class authorized by Ms. Henshaw. That vendor class was later used to create retroactive accounting justification. In plain language, someone built the paper trail after deciding they needed one. Lila's lawyer put a hand on her forearm. My client has concerns about how her authorizations were obtained and represented. Owen snapped. Oh, come on. Adrian held up one finger without taking his eyes off the table. Mr. Mercer, you'll speak when useful. Owen went red. Mira changed the slide again. This time it was not financial. It was a cluster of text messages and calendar notes extracted from corporate backups, and a company phone my father had reassigned from one assistant to another. The chain showed the shape of the scheme more clearly than any single document had. Hold Julia until papers are ready. Need donor board present. If she balks, mention grant exposure. Call Martin only after. Make sure network hears family platform language first. The timestamps were all there. The rhythm of planning. The certainty. Premeditation is not complicated when arrogant people write things down. Martin Voss's posture changed. Not much, but enough. Who accessed these devices? He asked. Lawfully preserved by a cooperating witness before they could be altered, Adrian replied. My father's gaze went cold. Marisol! The door opened. Marisol Vega stepped inside in a charcoal dress and black coat, her dark hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, a slim folder tucked under one arm. She had always moved with the kind of controlled economy that made other people underestimate her. She was 46, Puerto Rican, raised on the South Side, mother of 2, and for 14 years she had managed my father's empire with the quiet competence of a person never once mistaken for the owner of the room she was, in practice, keeping alive. For one strange second, nobody spoke. Then Celeste whispered, "You." Marisol didn't look at her. She took the empty chair near Adrian, set down her folder, and sat with her spine straight and both hands flat on the table. Martin's expression hardened. Mrs. Vega, are you represented? My counsel is downstairs, she said, and I'm here voluntarily. My father laughed once, but there was no humor in it. After everything I did for you. Marisol turned to face him then. That's the problem, she said. You think every paycheck is permission. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Adrian inclined his head. Mrs. Vega, in your own words, why are you here? She took a slow breath. Because Mr. Mercer told me, on September 6th, to prepare a media package positioning Northlight as a Mercer Family Initiatives program. I reminded him Ms. Mercer had formed it independently. He said, quote, she'll come around when she understands scale. 2 weeks later, he asked me to retrieve archived donor engagement files from Julia's protected drive. When I said IT would need formal approval, he told Owen to handle it. After that, I began preserving records because I believed they intended to force transfer. Owen scoffed. That's your interpretation. Marisol turned to him. No, my interpretation came later. The first thing I preserved was your text asking me whether criminal exposure language would shake her enough. Owen's lips parted, closed, opened again. Adrian said, why continue preserving records? For the first time, Marisol's composure loosened just a fraction. Not weakness, feeling. Because my daughter used Northlight, she said. Because she was about to drop out of Malcolm X College after her childcare fell through. Your daughter's so-called stupid app found her an emergency completion grant, a night transfer option, and a placement advisor in 48 hours. It did more for my family in a week than this foundation's gala speeches did in 10 years. My father's face changed in a way I had never seen before. Not rage, disbelief. He had spent a lifetime assuming he understood the full value of everything around him. Buildings, people, loyalty, women, sons, daughters, assistants, charities, ideas. If he couldn't immediately measure something, he discounted it. If he discounted it, he assumed everyone else would too. Hearing Marisol tie Northlight to a life he had never bothered to notice hit him like a door shutting. And, she added, voice even again, because you told me if this went wrong, finance would need someone expendable. Lila inhaled sharply. That was not. Marisol looked at her. He said your name first. Lila's composure finally cracked. Graham, she whispered. You said this was contained. He didn't answer. That was when the group started to fracture in earnest. Not dramatically. Not all at once. It happens in layers. One person sits farther from another than they did 5 minutes before. A lawyer places a hand between client and conversation. A wife stops smoothing her husband's sleeve. A brother decides silence is safer than alliance. The whole thing comes apart as quietly as old stitching. Celeste turned to Martin Voss. I want separate representation. Owen swung toward her. Now. She didn't look at him. Now. Lila's lawyer began whispering in her ear. Martin removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. Harold and Denise were not present in the room, but I could almost feel the donor board shifting somewhere above the city, deciding what version of loyalty survived public embarrassment. Adrian let the panic breathe for exactly 12 seconds. Then he closed the folder in front of him and spoke. Here is the proposed resolution. 1. Immediate written acknowledgement that Northlight LLC is wholly owned by Julia Mercer and has never been an asset of Mercer Family Initiatives, Mercer Freight and Storage, or any affiliated entity. 2. Retraction of all verbal and written accusations of theft or misappropriation. 3. Resignation by Graham Mercer from chairmanship of Mercer Family Initiatives, pending independent governance review. 4. Turnover of all documents, drafts, correspondence, backups, and media materials referencing Northlight within 24 hours. 5. No contact with CBS, any other outlet, or any Northlight partner except through counsel. 6. Reimbursement of legal and forensic costs. 7. An independent audit of the Foundation's vendor authorizations and governance practices, with full cooperation. Refuse, and the packet goes to the Illinois Attorney General's Charitable Oversight Division, the relevant donors, and every producer who has already expressed interest in why a national education platform had to hire litigation counsel before going on television. My father's mouth went thin. This is extortion. No, Adrian said. This is consequence. He slid the signature pages forward. Martin Voss picked them up, scanning quickly. My client requires time. You have until 5, Adrian replied. My father laughed again, low and disbelieving. You think you can erase me from my own foundation by throwing around some server logs and a resentful assistant? I spoke before Adrian could. No, I said. I think I can protect what is mine by proving what you did. He turned to me, and for a moment we were alone in the room despite everyone else. You always were ungrateful, he said. I held his gaze. And you always confused obedience with love. His face hardened. I built everything you have. I almost smiled. No, I said. You built the reason I learned to build alone. The room went still again. There are moments in long conflicts when you can feel history try one last time to lock you into your assigned role. The difficult daughter. The emotional one. The overreacher. The child who should be grateful for humiliation because at least it arrived from inside the family. I could feel that old script standing behind me then, ready to drape itself over my shoulders if I reached for it. I didn't. Instead, I opened my own folder and removed a single photograph. It was printed on matte paper. Not dramatic, just clear. The image showed the whiteboard wall in my old apartment office the week I registered Northlight. Workflow sketches, grant logic, student journeys. A date in the corner. 3 years earlier. Adrian set it beside the company press release draft and let the contrast speak for itself. On one side, creation. On the other, appetite. I wanted you to see them, I said, nodding toward the evidence. All of them. Every assumption. Every shortcut. Every person you trusted to help you take something because you couldn't imagine I'd prepared for the moment you tried. Owen ran a hand through his hair. Julia, enough. We can fix this. I looked at him. You were at dinner when he called it stupid. He dropped his eyes. Celeste tried a different angle, softer, more poisonous. You're really going to do this publicly? To your father. I tilted my head. You drafted the press release. That ended her. Martin Voss turned to my father and lowered his voice, but not enough. Graham, you need to think very carefully about exposure here. My father didn't blink. If I sign, I admit wrongdoing. If you don't, Martin said, you invite scrutiny that extends well beyond this room. The words landed. Martin was not a man who dramatized. If even he was signaling damage, the damage was real. Lila finally broke. I want immunity language, she said, too fast. I want it in writing that if I cooperate with the audit. Owen snapped. Are you kidding me? She wheeled on him. You told me the coding would be clean. The coding was clean. Mira spoke without emotion. It wasn't. You said she wouldn't check the approval trees, Lila hissed. Celeste stared at her. You both discussed this. Owen threw up his hands. Everyone discussed this. No, I said. Not everyone. Just everyone willing to steal. For the first time in years, my father looked old. Not physically. Structurally. Like a building whose load-bearing lie had just been identified in public. He sat back slowly and drummed once on the table with his ring finger. Then he looked at me with something dangerously close to contemptuous admiration. You set this up months ago. Yes. You baited Owen. I protected myself. You made your own family walk into this. I thought of the restaurant dinner. The laugh. The word stupid tossed over a plate of charred ribeye and truffle butter like my work was something sticky on a shoe. I thought of the forged packet on the conference table, the donor board, the threat of prison meant to terrify me into surrendering what I had built. I thought of every year I had been expected to call cruelty realism and theft strategy because it came wrapped in my father's voice. Then I said the truth. No. You walked in because you couldn't imagine I wasn't standing where you left me. Martin asked for a caucus. They moved to the adjoining room. The frosted glass door closed behind them. Through the blur, I could make out bodies angling sharply, hands lifting, one figure pacing. Owen at one point looked like he was pointing at Lila. Celeste stood with her back to all of them, arms crossed, head tilted, as if already calculating what version of herself would survive the best. My father stood mostly still. That worried me more than if he had shouted. Adrian stayed seated. You did well, he said. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. I'm not enjoying this. I know. Is that bad? No, he recapped his pen. Enjoyment and resolve are not the same thing. You only need one. Mira closed a folder. For what it's worth, he underestimated you in a very data-rich way. I laughed once, unexpectedly. That almost makes it feel charming. It isn't, she said. No, I agreed. It isn't. Marisol sat beside me, hands folded, and looked out at the river. He'll sign, she said. You sound sure. He only fights losing battles when there's still an audience. I turned to her. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She thought about it. Because I needed proof that he'd actually do it. Men like your father threaten theft the way other people threaten weather. I wanted to know if this was another storm warning or the flood. And when did you know? When he asked whether the board would be more useful shocked or sympathetic, I looked down at the table. After a moment, Marisol reached into her bag and took out her phone. On the lock screen was a photo of her daughter in graduation robes, grinning so hard her eyes had almost disappeared. She finishes next month, Marisol said softly. Medical billing certification. Night classes. She calls Northlight the map that got handed to her before she ran out of road. I swallowed. I built it for girls like her. I know, she said. That's why I'm here. The caucus took 38 minutes. When they came back, the room had changed. Owen's tie was gone. Celeste's lipstick had faded around the edges. Lila would not look at anyone. Martin Voss set the draft resolution on the table and adjusted one page. We have revisions, he said. Of course they did. We spent the next 2 hours working through language, cooperation scopes, audit parameters, non-interference obligations, statement phrasing, return of materials, preservation orders, separate counsel notations. I answered when necessary, stayed silent when strategy demanded it, and watched my father discover what happens when you can't dominate a room with volume alone. At one point, he tried one last lunge. This television appearance, he said, looking at me instead of Adrian. You really think this is some triumph? A morning segment? That's what you're willing to burn your family down over. I met his eyes. No, I said. I'm willing to protect my work. The television segment is just proof that you were wrong out loud. That hurt him more than anything else had. Because he had built his life on private contempt and public certainty. He could dismiss me at dinner if the room was small enough. But a nation-sized room was different. In a room that big, he couldn't reach across the table and call an achievement stupid if 1 million people had already seen what it did for someone else's child. By 4:15, the final language was done. Adrian passed the signature pages, down one by one. Lila signed first, hand trembling once midway through her last name. Celeste signed with a face so blank it looked curated. Owen held the pen too tight and had to start over when the first signature came out jagged. Martin initialed as counsel. Then the papers reached my father. He did not pick up the pen immediately. Instead, he looked at the stack, then at me. You think this makes you better than me, he said. No, I replied. Just safer from you. He held my gaze for another long second. Then he signed. The sound of pen on paper was small, thin, almost disappointing after so many years of fear. I had expected thunder, maybe, or the internal feeling of a locked door bursting open. But often the biggest endings sound like office supplies. A scratch of ink, a stapler closing, a copy machine warming up in the next room. Adrian gathered the signed documents, checked each page, and slid one executed copy toward me. "We're done," he said. My father stood. "This isn't over." Adrian looked up. "For your sake, Mr. Mercer, I strongly advise against treating that as a promise." Owen stayed seated, staring at the table as if maybe another version of his life was hidden in the wood grain. Celeste rose and smoothed her blouse, then looked at me with a kind of chilly disbelief. "You really planned all this?" I put the executed packet in my bag. "No," I said. "I planned for you to underestimate me." The rest practically assembled itself. Marisol stood too. My father turned when he heard the chair move, and for a strange second I saw the old hierarchy reach for itself again. Employer, assistant, command. It didn't arrive. He looked at her and said only, "You should have remembered who took care of you." Marisol picked up her coat. "And you should have remembered who knew where everything was." We walked to the door together. My hand was on the handle when I turned back one last time. The late afternoon light had shifted. The walnut walls looked darker now. The room had gone from authoritative to tired in the span of a signature. My father stood at the end of the table where he had imagined himself winning. "You always said respect had to be earned," I told him. "Consider this paid in full." Then I left. The next few days were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, just quiet in the eerie, suspended way large collapses often are before the dust becomes visible. Lawyers traded drafts. Northlight's partners received the corrected ownership statement. The network producer sent a measured email thanking my counsel for the clarification and confirming the segment was still moving forward. Mercer Family Initiatives announced an independent governance review, in language so bloodless it might have described upholstery. I slept in fragments. My phone lit up constantly, but I let most of it pass. First came the predictable messages from extended family who had never once intervened when my father humiliated me in private, but now felt called to criticize my tone. Then came the more practical ones. Journalists, former donors, 2 old coworkers, 3 people I hadn't spoken to since graduate school. One text from Owen that simply said, "You made your point." Another, 6 hours later, "Dad's furious." As if that were weather I still needed warning about. I archived both. 3 mornings after the signing, I was on a flight to New York. The plane lifted through low cloud just after sunrise, and for the first time in weeks I had a stretch of time where nobody could demand anything from me except that I fasten a belt and choose between coffee and juice. I took the window seat and watched Chicago flatten into blocks and silver water and then disappear under cloud. My reflection in the glass looked tired, older around the eyes, but steadier. I thought about the first version of Northlight, not the polished one with institutional dashboards and retention reports and partnership portals. The first one had been uglier. A skeletal interface built because I was volunteering evenings at a library on the west side and kept seeing the same kind of student walk in with the same look on their face. Brilliant, capable, exhausted, usually first generation, often working, almost always trying to navigate higher education through forms, deadlines, transfer credits, emergency aid, childcare gaps, predatory paperwork, and institutional indifference. They didn't need inspiration. They needed navigation, a map that updated in real time, a system that didn't speak in bureaucracy. My father had never understood why I cared. To him, a problem wasn't real unless it existed inside a spreadsheet he owned. If a student dropped out because her son got sick and she missed an aid deadline, that was unfortunate. If his warehouse manager missed a shipping window, that was catastrophe. One affected a life. The other affected margin. He had chosen his moral arithmetic a long time ago. I opened my laptop over Indiana and reread my interview prep. The producer had warned me it would be conversational, warm, focused on impact. They wanted origin story, scale, what came next. The kind of questions my father always mocked as soft until he realized soft questions can build very hard legitimacy. When I landed, Priya was waiting at LaGuardia with 2 coffees and the kind of grin that only appears on women who have watched you survive things people assumed would bury you. Priya Shah had been my best friend since sophomore year at Northwestern, when she saw me sitting on a dorm hallway floor eating dry cereal out of a mug and said, "You look like somebody with a plan and no time. Want help?" It wasn't phrased as a question. That was Priya. She had worked in nonprofit operations, then civic tech, then joined Northlight 18 months earlier because, in her words, "I'm tired of watching idiots build platforms for people they've never met." She hugged me hard enough to crack my sternum, handed me coffee, and stepped back to inspect my face. "You look good," she said. "I look litigated." "That too." We took a car into Manhattan. Rain had polished the streets. Storefront glass held the city in fragments. Midday light bounced off wet pavement and stainless steel, and the black umbrellas moving along 6th Avenue. Priya updated me as we passed blocks of limestone and scaffolding and blinking walk signs. "Independent audit is underway," she said. 2 Mercer Foundation donors froze commitments. 1 board member resigned preemptively. Also, I spoke to the segment producer. "They love the college completion stories. They want you in blue, not black." "Blue, not black," I repeated. "Trust me. More human. Less homicide." I looked out the window. Pity. I had a very strong homicide blazer. She laughed. Then her expression softened. "Are you okay?" I thought about that. "Not in the simple way," I said. "But yes, that's the right answer." We checked into the hotel the network had arranged near Times Square. Not glamorous, despite the address. Soft gray carpet, brushed brass lamps, too much mirror, the universal smell of climate control and soap. My room overlooked a slice of avenue where yellow cabs slid through the rain in clean bands of motion. I hung the blue dress on the wardrobe hook and sat on the edge of the bed for a minute with both feet flat on the carpet. Then my phone buzzed. Dad. Not Graham. Not some formal leftover from legal correspondence. Dad. That word still had a way of finding old entrances. The message was short. "This has gone too far." A second one followed before I could even decide whether to archive it. "You humiliated me in front of strangers for attention." Then a third. "Come home. We can still handle this privately." Privately. That was the word men like him used when they wanted the room made smaller again. Easier to control. Easier to deny. Easier to tell a daughter she had imagined something because only 3 people had heard it and 2 of them needed his approval. I archived the messages without responding. The next morning, the studio was colder than I expected. Not emotionally. Physically. Big television spaces always seemed to run on ice and adrenaline. The green room had textured cream walls, chrome side tables, bowls of packaged almonds, and a tray of fruit so polished it looked decorative. People moved quickly without appearing rushed. A stylist adjusted a lamp. A production assistant clipped a mic pack to the back of my dress. Somewhere beyond the hallway, applause rose and fell in controlled waves. My segment producer, a woman named Tessa with tortoiseshell glasses and a headset, came in holding a clipboard and smiling the efficient smile of someone who has already solved 3 problems before 8 a.m. "You good?" she asked. "Yes." "Nervous?" "A little." "Perfect. Reads is alive." She walked me through the timing. 2 anchors. 6 minutes live with 1 package rolled in. Focus on measurable impact, personal origin, growth plans. There would be a clip of 1 student story. They'd show interface graphics on the monitor wall behind us. She paused before leaving and lowered the clipboard slightly. "For what it's worth," she said, "we get pitched a lot of founders. Your notes were the first ones I read this month that felt like someone had built a thing because they actually love the people using it." I smiled. "Thank you." She nodded and left. I sat alone for a minute after that, listening to the muffled studio noise through the door. A makeup artist passed once, then twice. Someone laughed in the hallway. The mic wire at my back felt oddly grounding, a physical reminder that in a few minutes my voice would travel farther than any room my father had ever controlled. Priya texted from the audience waiting area. "Breathe. Also, if you say ecosystem, more than twice I will cut your mic." I laughed under my breath and typed back. Noted. Then another text came in. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but some instinct made me open it. It was from my father's personal phone, not the office line. I was wrong about the app. I didn't understand what it was. Nothing else. No apology. No acknowledgement of the forged documents. No mention of the threats. No admission of what he had done. Just the nearest he could come, maybe, to facing the size of the miscalculation. I stared at the message for 3 long seconds. Then I locked the screen and set the phone face down. I didn't need the text. I didn't need the sentence. He had been wrong the entire time, whether he could pronounce it cleanly or not. A production assistant opened the door. "We're ready for you." The set was all soft amber and polished glass. Screens stacked in luminous panels. Curved desk. Brightness everywhere, but arranged so carefully it felt warm instead of harsh. I stepped into position beside the anchors, and for one strange second I saw the whole thing from outside myself. The daughter with the stupid little project, standing under national lights while camera operators glided past on rubber wheels and a country-sized audience waited to hear her explain what she had built. One anchor, Nina Park, shook my hand. "We're excited to have you." "Thank you." The other, David Klein, smiled toward camera as the countdown started in his ear. 3, 2. The red light came on. What I remember most isn't what I said first. It's the stillness in my own body. No shaking hands. No racing pulse. Just clarity. Nina introduced me by my full name. Founder and CEO of Northlight. The cheering beneath us said education innovator helping first-gen students stay in school. Behind us, on the giant screen wall, the Northlight interface rose in cool blues and white against the amber set. My father had called it stupid over dinner. Now it was 18 feet tall on national television. They asked about origin, and I told the truth. That I had watched students disappear from institutions that talked endlessly about access but built almost nothing for navigation. That Northlight was designed to close the gap between being admitted and actually staying long enough to graduate. That emergency support, plain language guidance, transfer logic, and human follow-through save more futures than slogans do. They rolled the package. On the monitor, Marisol's daughter appeared in a college hallway under soft afternoon light, talking about the night Northlight found her a completion path when she thought she was done. Then a student veteran in Ohio, a single mother in Phoenix, a community college advisor in Detroit. Not abstract outcomes. Faces, names, rooms, fluorescent hallways and kitchen tables and bus stops and laptops balanced beside sleeping children. When the camera came back to me, David asked, "Did you always know this would become national?" I answered honestly, "No. I knew it needed to exist. That was enough to start." Nina smiled. "And now?" I looked toward the lens. "Now I know how many people were waiting for somebody to build it as if their lives were urgent." I didn't think about my father in that moment. Not directly. But later, when people sent clips and screenshots, and a producer forwarded a still of me under the lights with the Northlight logo behind my shoulder, I knew exactly why the image would stay with him. Because television had done what daughters are rarely allowed to do inside powerful families. It had made his private dismissal irrelevant in public. By the time I got back to the hotel, my phone was unusable. Messages stacked faster than I could clear them. Congratulations. Partnership requests. Old professors. Reporters. Former volunteers. One state education office. 2 investor groups I had no interest in. 3 cousins suddenly remembering they had always admired my drive. My inbox looked like weather radar. And tucked between all of it was a message from Owen. "I saw you on TV. No insult. No request. Just that." I archived it. 6 months later, I was drinking coffee barefoot in a sunlit kitchen that belonged entirely to me. The apartment sat on the top floor of a narrow brick building in Logan Square, with old maple floors, white plaster walls, black steel windows, and a tiny balcony just wide enough for 2 chairs and a line of herbs I kept forgetting to water on schedule. The morning light came in gold across the countertops and caught in the steam rising from my mug. Somewhere downstairs, a neighbor was playing Nina Simone softly enough that it felt like ambient weather. There is a particular kind of peace that only arrives after you have stopped waiting for somebody to become kinder. Not because you stop caring, because you stop negotiating reality. Northlight had grown faster than any of us predicted after the segment aired. Not because television alone changes everything. It doesn't. But visibility matters when it lands on top of something real. Within weeks, we signed 3 statewide community college systems, 2 urban library partnerships, and a pilot with a national workforce network serving adult learners re-entering education after layoffs. We moved into an actual office with poured concrete floors, warm oak desks, and a wall of pinned student letters that Priya called our anti-ego installation. I hired advisors, engineers, student support leads, and a partnerships director who had spent 9 years inside higher ed compliance and somehow still laughed easily. And because the universe appreciates symmetry, The skills I had sharpened protecting Northlight turned out to be useful in building it too. Documentation, pattern recognition, institutional pressure points, strategic patience, knowing when to speak, when to preserve, and when to let someone reveal themselves by assuming you were less prepared than you were. I had spent so long surviving power that I understood how to redesign systems around the people it usually overlooked. The karmic justice, when it came, was not cinematic. It was administrative, reputational, slow enough to be denied week by week, and absolute enough to ruin sleep. Graham Mercer stepped down as chair of Mercer Family Initiatives, temporarily. Then permanently. 2 independent board members refused to renew under him. A donor family from Winnetka withdrew 7 figures from the foundation after the governance review found irregular vendor authorizations and inadequate oversight, which is elegant legal language for people using a charity like a personal accessory. His company, Mercer Freight and Storage, survived, but lenders forced governance concessions, and a compliance monitor after questions about internal controls started leaking into conversations nobody could fully contain. He still had money. Men like my father almost always do. But status is different from wealth, and status was what he had actually worshipped. That part began to rot. Celeste lost her seat on 2 gala committees within a month. One women's hospital benefit asked her not to chair the spring luncheon due to transition priorities. Another board quietly failed to renominate her. She tried to save face with a European trip and a carefully filtered sequence of photos in linen and sunglasses, but Chicago philanthropy runs on gossip dressed as concern. Once people decide you knew more than you admitted, the invitations thin out faster than you think they can. Owen was pushed out as chief operating officer before Christmas, and given the kind of title that sounds respectable until you realize it includes no direct reports and no decisions. By February, that title disappeared too. Last I heard, he was consulting, which in our world often means expensive lunches and unanswered calls. Every so often someone from logistics would mention seeing him in a hotel bar with the posture of a man still waiting for the old room to return. Lila cooperated early and thoroughly, which saved her from the worst version of the fallout, but not from consequence. She paid fines, lost her position, and became an object lesson in what happens when ambition confuses proximity to power with protection. The last thing I heard was that she was doing contract bookkeeping for a dental chain in Naperville and telling people she wanted a quieter season. As for the enablers, their punishments arrived in the proportions they had earned. Harold Pierce made a public show of supporting the governance review and then quietly retired. Denise Walsh sent me a handwritten note that said, simply, "I should have spoken sooner." Martin Voss stopped returning calls from the Mercer orbit after the audit went public. A communications consultant who helped draft the fake press release found her name in a disclosure appendix and spent the next month explaining, over lunch after lunch, that she had only been given partial context. People always call it karma when what they really mean is record keeping. The messages kept coming for a while. My father cycled through all of them. Anger first. "You've made a spectacle of us." Then strategy. "We should talk before this gets worse." Then injured authority. "I am still your father." Then, the one that almost made me laugh because of how nakedly it reached for nostalgia. "The family isn't the same." No, I thought every time one came in. It isn't. Around New Year's, he tried a different tone. "I miss you." I stared at that message longer than I should have. Not because I believed it the way he meant it. Because I knew what he missed. Access. Deference. The old architecture in which he could wound and still expect presence. What he missed was not me as I existed. He missed the version of me that still came when called. I archived that one too. I never blocked him. People always ask about that when they hear the story. Why not block him? Why not cut it off cleanly? The answer is simple. I didn't need to. Silence is most powerful when chosen every time. Northlight's office sat in a converted warehouse off Milwaukee Avenue with matte black steel beams, blonde wood conference tables, and glass rooms named after women educators who had built things without waiting for permission. On Fridays, Priya ordered too much Thai food and made everyone stop pretending meetings needed to run past 6. On Wednesdays, our student support team read anonymized user stories aloud, so the engineers never lost touch with the humans behind the feature requests. Sometimes I would arrive early, unlock the office in the blue half-light before sunrise, and stand for a minute in the quiet listening to the heat click on in the vents. It felt less like running a company than tending a signal fire. One Thursday in March, Priya leaned in my doorway holding 2 coffees and wearing the expression she reserved for news that would be funny if the people involved hadn't once made our lives miserable. "You will not believe who I just saw," she said. "Who?" "Owen. At Soho House. Trying to explain supply chain thought leadership to a woman who was very obviously interviewing him for a job he was not going to get." I took the coffee from her. "Be kind." "I am being kind. I'm leaving out the part where he said disruption 5 times in 4 minutes. I laughed. "Was he alone?" "No. There was a guy there pretending not to know what happened with your dad. Which is, respectfully, impossible. Also, before you ask, yes, Owen saw me. No, I did not rescue him. Tragic." She grinned and leaned against the doorframe. "Oh, and Marisol texted. Graham showed up at the university club last night, and apparently 3 men at the bar suddenly found their appetizers fascinating. That one,